She thought it was love, but behind the laughter, behind the I love yous, were warning signs, bruises, isolation, fear. And then, on the night of January 29th, 2025, in Jackson, Mississippi, everything ended with a gunshot. Kenasia Bowie is no longer here to tell her story, so we're telling it for her. This is Dark Rainbows, where the stories of LGBTQ+ lives lost to silence, to violence, and to erasure are finally told. Kenasia Bowie was 24 years old at the time of her death. A daughter, a sister, a friend, a young black lesbian woman navigating love and life in the Deep South. She had dreams of more peace, more joy, more freedom. But she carried herself like someone who had been taught to settle, because the world often told her she wasn't enough. Not pretty enough, not thin enough, not straight enough. Still, she smiled. She made people feel seen. And when she loved with everything. Maybe too much. That's when Michaela Davis came into her life. She was bold, protective, intense. At first, Michaela made Kenasia feel wanted in a way she never had before. But control can disguise itself as care. At first, it's don't talk to them. Then, why didn't you answer your phone? Then, silence. Then, fear. Friends say the change in Kenasia came slowly, like a house settling before it collapses. She stopped showing up. She stopped smiling. And she never said why. But her eyes, they said it all. Kenasia had been fat-shamed most of her life. The words started early, on playgrounds, in classrooms, whispered behind her back, and sometimes shouted to her face. She learned to shrink herself, to make herself small, to avoid the sting of cruel laughter and the weight of judgmental stares. Every year, the comments grew sharper, more pointed, and more personal. By the time she was a teenager, the shame had woven itself into her sense of self, a silent companion that followed her everywhere. And Michaela knew it. She saw the way Kenasia flinched at certain words, the way she hesitated before speaking up, the way she avoided mirrors and group photos. Michaela used this knowledge like a weapon, turning Kenasia's deepest insecurities into tools of control. When they argued, Michaela would snap, her words sharp as knives, slicing through any sense of safety Kenasia might have felt. "You think anyone else would want you?" She'd sneer, her voice dripping with contempt. The message was always the same. Kenasia was lucky Michaela tolerated her, that no one else would ever love her, that she was unworthy of kindness or respect. These weren't just words spoken in anger. They were calculated, designed to keep Kenasia small, afraid, and dependent. The phone would light up with messages that started as apologies, but quickly twisted into reminders of Kenasia's supposed flaws. Even when Kenasia tried to reach out to friends, Michaela would find ways to intercept, to isolate, to erase any support that might threaten her control. "Nobody loves girls like you." The words echoed in Kenasia's mind long after the arguments ended. They became a refrain, a cruel lullaby that played on repeat in the quiet moments. She would sit alone in her room, replaying every conversation, every insult, every moment she'd tried to stand up for herself, only to be knocked down again. The loneliness was suffocating, a heavy blanket she couldn't shake off. She began to believe the lies, to internalize the hatred, to see herself through Michaela's eyes, unlovable, unwanted, undeserving. The pain was more than emotional. It was physical, a tightness in her chest, a knot in her stomach, a constant ache that never quite went away. This is what fatphobic emotional abuse sounds like. It's invisible, hiding in the spaces between words, in the silences after a fight, in the looks that linger just a little too long. It's insidious, creeping into every corner of a person's life, poisoning their relationships, their self-worth, their hope for the future. Unlike bruises or broken bones, the wounds of emotional abuse don't show up on X-rays or police reports. They're hidden beneath layers of shame and fear, masked by forced smiles and nervous laughter. The abuser's words become the victim's inner voice, repeating the same hateful messages until they feel like truth. Fatphobia isn't just about body size. It's about power, about control, about making someone feel so small that they forget they ever deserved more. And it isolates the victim until they feel like they have nowhere else to go. Friends drift away, tired of hearing the same stories, unsure how to help. Family members offer advice that feels hollow or judgmental. The world outside seems cold and unwelcoming, full of people who might judge or reject her just like Michaela does. Kenasia's world shrinks, her options narrowing until the only place she feels even a twisted sense of safety is with her abuser. Love becomes the cage, a prison built from longing and fear, from the desperate hope that things might get better, that Michaela might change, that maybe, just maybe, Kenasia is worthy of love after all. But the bars of this cage are invisible, made not of steel but of words, of glances, of silence. And the hands that once held you, hands that once offered comfort, that once promised safety, become fists. The transformation is gradual, almost imperceptible at first. A gentle touch becomes a grip, a reassuring hug becomes a way to hold you in place. The person you loved becomes someone you fear, their affection turning to anger, their promises turning to threats. The violence isn't always physical. Sometimes it's the violence of words, of silence, of withheld affection. But the impact is just as real, just as devastating. Kenasia learned to flinch at sudden movements, to brace herself for the next outburst, to anticipate the next cruel remark. She stopped trusting her own instincts, stopped believing in her own worth, stopped hoping for escape. But there were no police reports, no restraining orders, no evidence that anything was wrong, at least not in the ways the world recognizes. Kenasia never called for help, never filed a complaint, never told anyone the full truth. She convinced herself it wasn't bad enough to warrant intervention, that she was overreacting, that she could handle it on her own. The paperwork stayed blank, the phone calls never made, the cries for help swallowed by fear and shame. The system isn't built to catch this kind of pain, to recognize the signs of emotional abuse that leaves no visible scars. So Kenasia suffered in silence, her story hidden in plain sight. No signs of danger, at least not on paper. Just silence. The kind of silence that screams, that suffocates, that fills every corner of a life until there's no room left for hope. Kenasia learned to keep her pain hidden, to smile when she wanted to cry, to pretend everything was fine even as she was falling apart inside. The world saw a quiet, withdrawn woman, maybe a little sad, maybe a little lonely, but they didn't see the battle raging beneath the surface. They didn't hear the words that haunted her, the doubts that gnawed at her, the fear that kept her trapped. In the absence of bruises, the silence became its own kind of evidence, a testimony to the power of invisible wounds. And then, the sound of a gunshot. On January 29, 2025, the silence was shattered, replaced by chaos, by fear, by the harsh reality that the pain Kenasia endured was never truly invisible. The world finally took notice, but by then, the damage was done. The invisible cage had become a trap, and the cost of escape was more than anyone should ever have to pay. This is the reality of fatphobic emotional abuse, a reality that too often goes unseen, unheard, and unacknowledged until it's too late. January 29, 2025, Jackson, Mississippi. The city was cloaked in darkness, the kind of night where the air feels heavy and the streets are nearly empty, save for the occasional car passing by. In the heart of the city, life continued as usual for most. Families winding down, televisions flickering behind drawn curtains, the hum of distant traffic blending with the soft patter of rain. But inside one apartment complex, something was about to shatter the quiet routine forever. Neighbors in their apartment complex heard yelling. It started as muffled voices, an argument perhaps, or a heated conversation that had grown too loud to contain. The walls, thin and worn from years of stories, could not keep the tension inside. Some neighbors turned up their televisions, trying to drown out the noise. Others paused, listening, concern growing with every raised voice. For some it was a familiar sound, arguments that came and went, tempers that flared and faded. But tonight something felt different. The anger was sharper, the words more desperate. A loud crash. The unmistakable sound of something heavy hitting the floor. A table overturned, a chair thrown, or perhaps a body falling. Then, silence. A thick, suffocating silence that seemed to stretch on forever, as if the entire building was holding its breath. Then, a single scream. Piercing, raw, and filled with terror. It cut through the night, jolting neighbors from their beds, sending a chill down every spine. Someone was in trouble. Someone needed help. When officers arrived, Kenasia Bowie had been shot in the chest. The scene inside the apartment was chaotic. Furniture askew, shattered glass on the floor, the metallic scent of blood hanging in the air. Officers moved quickly, assessing the situation, calling for paramedics. Kenasia lay on the floor, her life slipping away with every passing second. The officers tried to keep her conscious, asking her name, urging her to hold on, but her eyes were already glazing over, her breath shallow and ragged. She was rushed to the hospital, but she didn't make it. The doctors and nurses did everything they could, working frantically under the harsh fluorescent lights, but the wound was too severe. In the waiting room, friends and family gathered, clinging to hope, praying for a miracle. But the news came quickly, and it was devastating. Kenasia Bowie, just 23 years old, was gone. The world she knew, the dreams she carried, the laughter she shared, all of it ended in a single, senseless moment. Just like that, she was gone, 23 years old. Her absence left a void that could never be filled. A daughter, a friend, a bright light extinguished far too soon. In the days that followed, her loved ones gathered to remember her, sharing stories, tears, and memories. They lit candles, posted tributes online, and tried to make sense of the tragedy. But the questions lingered, heavy and unanswered. How could this have happened? Why did it end this way? And who pulled the trigger? The investigation began immediately, officers combing through the apartment for clues, interviewing witnesses, piecing together the final moments of Kenasia's life. The community watched in shock as the story unfolded, struggling to understand how a night that began like any other could end in such violence. The answer, when it came, was almost too painful to bear. The woman who once said she loved her, Michaela Davis, Kenasia's partner, her confidant, the person she trusted most, was the one accused of pulling the trigger. Their relationship, once filled with laughter and affection, had become strained in recent months. Friends recalled arguments, moments of jealousy, and a growing sense of unease. But no one imagined it would end like this. The love that once brought them together had curdled into something dark and destructive. Michaela Davis was arrested on the scene. The weapon was recovered. The motive? That was harder to pin down. Police searched for answers. Was it a crime of passion, a moment of rage, or something deeper? As the investigation unfolded, a troubling pattern began to emerge. Friends and family spoke of years of manipulation, of arguments that left Kenasia isolated and afraid. There were stories of control, of silence, of secrets kept behind closed doors. The truth was more complicated than anyone wanted to believe, hidden in years of manipulation, silence, and control. The tragedy of that final night was not just the violence that erupted, but the pain that had been building for so long, unseen, unspoken, and unresolved. In the end, it was not just a single moment that broke the silence, but a lifetime of hurt that finally demanded to be heard. And as the city of Jackson mourned, the echoes of that night served as a stark reminder. Sometimes, the most dangerous things are the ones we keep hidden, even from ourselves. There was no breaking news coverage, no urgent headlines flashing across our screens, no anchors pausing their broadcast to share her name, her face, her story, no public outrage that spilled into the streets, no hashtags trending, no candlelight vigils broadcast live for the world to see. The world kept turning, the city kept moving, and for most people, Kenasia's life and death passed by unnoticed. Why? Because Kenasia was black, because she was gay, because she was fat, because she didn't fit the image that the media and so many of us have been taught to see as worthy of attention, worthy of empathy, worthy of justice. The truth is, Kenasia didn't fit the media's image of the perfect victim. She wasn't the kind of person whose disappearance would spark a nationwide search, whose tragedy would inspire think pieces and round-the-clock coverage. But she mattered. Her life was precious. She was loved, she was needed, and she deserved to be seen. The silence around her story is not just an oversight. It's a reflection of who we, as a society, choose to value, and who we allow to disappear into the shadows. And Kenasia's story is not unique. She is one of countless women whose lives are overlooked, whose pain is ignored, whose stories are left untold. For every headline that makes it to the front page, there are dozens, hundreds of stories like hers that never see the light of day. These are the invisible victims, the ones who slip through the cracks because of who they are, how they look, who they love. Their families grieve in silence, their friends search for answers that never come, and the world moves on as if nothing happened. The numbers are staggering, and yet they rarely make the news. 1 in 2 lesbian women will experience domestic violence in their lifetimes. That's half. Half of all lesbian women, your friends, your neighbors, your co-workers, living with the threat or the reality of violence in their own homes. And yet, when we talk about domestic violence, the stories we hear, the images we see, almost never include women like Kenasia. The statistics are there, but the faces, the names, the humanity behind those numbers are too often missing. For Black women, the danger is even greater. Black women are 2.5 times more likely to be murdered by a partner than white women. This is not just a statistic, it's a crisis. It's a reality that plays out in homes and neighborhoods across the country every single day. And yet, when these tragedies happen, they are met with silence. The media rarely tells their stories. The public rarely demands justice. The system rarely delivers it. Instead, families are left to mourn alone, to fight for answers, to demand that someone, anyone, pays attention. But when it's woman-on-woman abuse, the silence is even deeper. There's a discomfort, a confusion, a lack of language for what's happening. People don't know how to talk about it, so they don't. Survivors are left feeling isolated, ashamed, and invisible. They worry that no one will believe them, that their pain doesn't count, that their stories don't matter. The support systems that exist are often not equipped to help, and the stigma can be overwhelming. So the cycle continues, unbroken and unseen. But we refuse to let that silence win. We refuse to let these stories go untold. Kenasia mattered. Every woman like her matters. Their lives, their struggles, their pain, and their resilience deserve to be seen, to be heard, to be honored. We will say their names. We will share their stories. We will shine a light into the darkness, and we will not look away. Because the invisible victims are only invisible if we choose not to see them. And today we choose to see. There are so many names, so many stories like Kenasia's. But because queer love is rarely seen as real, queer abuse is rarely taken seriously. Who do you call when the woman you love becomes your abuser? What shelter do you go to when people don't believe women can be violent? Who protects you when society already deems your love invalid? There are no easy answers. But here's what we know. Kenasia deserved protection. She deserved to be heard. And she deserved to live. To every woman who sees herself in this story, to every survivor who has been gaslit, body-shamed, broken down, you are not crazy, you are not too much, you are not unworthy, you are not alone. There are shelters that will take you in. There are advocates who will believe you. There is life after leaving. And even if the world tells you otherwise, you deserve a love that doesn't hurt. Kenasia Bowie is not just another case file. She was real. She was radiant. She was worthy. And her story deserves to be heard because there are thousands more like her. Still alive. Still stuck. Still silent. Say her name. Remember her truth. Break the silence. This is Dark Rainbows. If this story moved you, share it. If you or someone you love is in danger, get help. And if you believe these stories must be told, subscribe. Because remembrance is resistance, and silence is deadly.